When you lose the person who made life make sense, the world doesn't stop, it just stops mattering. Aldric Vonn knew that feeling the day he buried his wife and realized he was completely alone. At 53, with his grown children living their own lives, he'd had enough of the empty apartment and the job that felt meaningless. He packed a bag and walked into the forest until he couldn't hear anything but his own breath. That's when he saw it, a massive tree with a cabin built right inside its hollow trunk, wooden steps wrapped around the bark. Inside he found journals, pressed flowers and letters from a man who'd lived there alone, helping strangers find peace. Aldric sat in that quiet space and wondered, could a broken man still matter? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The apartment had been empty for 3 months before Aldric finally decided to leave it behind. Not empty of furniture or belongings, those still cluttered every corner, gathering dust in the pale morning light that filtered through curtains. Helen had chosen 7 years ago, empty of purpose, empty of the small sounds that make a house feel alive. Her humming while she made coffee, the soft shuffle of her slippers on hardwood, the way she'd sigh contentedly when she settled into her reading chair by the window. Aldric stood in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in late September, staring at the coffee maker, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually tasted his coffee. He drank it every day, black, 2 cups, but it was just a ritual now, something to fill the minutes between waking and the long stretch of hours that followed. His son Brennan had called the night before. The conversation had been brief, awkward in the way their conversations had become since the funeral. "Just checking in, Dad, making sure you're okay." Aldric had assured him he was fine, knowing his son didn't believe him but was grateful not to press further. Brennan had his own life, now a wife, a 2-year-old daughter, a demanding job in Boston. He couldn't drop everything to babysit his grieving father. Lydia, his daughter, tried harder. She lived closer, just across town, and stopped by every Sunday with groceries Aldric rarely touched. She'd clean while she talked, wiping down counters that weren't dirty, reorganizing cupboards that didn't need it. Last Sunday, she'd found Helen's reading glasses on the side table where they'd sat untouched for 94 days. She'd held them for a moment, then quietly set them back down. Neither of them had spoken about it. 25 years of marriage. That's what the obituary had said, as if you could summarize a life shared in a simple count of years. They'd met when Aldric was 28, both of them working at the same architectural firm in Seattle. Helen had been a project coordinator, sharp and organized, in ways that balanced his creative chaos. Their first conversation had been about a missed deadline and somehow turned into dinner plans. The cancer diagnosis came 2 years ago, sudden and absolute. Stage 4. The doctors spoke in careful, measured tones about treatment options and quality of life. Helen had faced it with the same practical determination she brought to everything, researching, planning, making lists of things that needed to be done. She'd organized her own memorial service, down to the music selections. "I don't want you fumbling through this," she'd told him with a gentle smile. "You're terrible at planning parties." For 2 years, their world had narrowed to hospital visits, treatment schedules, and the careful management of pain and hope. Aldric had taken a leave of absence from his job, middle management, at a firm that designed commercial buildings, work that had paid well but never stirred his soul. He'd told himself he'd return after, but after had come and gone, and he couldn't imagine walking back into that office pretending any of it mattered. The morning he decided to leave, Aldric had been sorting through papers in Helen's desk bills, insurance documents, the administrative debris of a life ended. He found a folder labeled "Future Plans" in her neat handwriting. Inside were printouts of hiking trails, national parks, cabin rentals in the Cascades, places they'd talked about visiting when they retired, when there was time, when life slowed down enough to breathe. They'd never gone. There had always been reasons, work deadlines, family obligations, and then the cancer, which had stolen every future plan and replaced it with the desperate hope for just one more day. Aldric closed the folder and made his decision. He called his supervisor that afternoon and officially resigned. He called Brennan and Lydia and told them he needed time away, somewhere quiet, to think. They'd both expressed concern, in their different ways, Brennan cautious and measured, Lydia emotional and worried, but neither tried to stop him. Maybe they understood, or maybe they were just relieved someone else would be responsible for him for a while. He sold Helen's car, put most of their belongings in storage, and kept the apartment lease in case he changed his mind. Then he packed a single large backpack with clothes, a sleeping bag, basic camping supplies, and one photograph of Helen from their 10th anniversary, her smile genuine, her eyes bright with life that hadn't yet learned to count its remaining days. The Cascade Wilderness stretched across the border between Washington and Oregon, thousands of acres of old-growth forest, mountain streams, and trails that ranged from day hikes to week-long expeditions. Aldric chose a trailhead 3 hours east of Seattle, one marked for experienced hikers only. He signed the logbook at the ranger station, name, date, expected return, unknown, and started walking. The first 2 days, he stayed on marked trails, camping at designated sites, following the rules. His body ached in ways it hadn't since his 20s. His shoulders burned from the pack weight, his knees protested every downhill stretch, and blisters formed on his heels, despite good boots. But the pain felt clean, honest. It was pain, he understood, pain that made sense. On the 3rd day, he left the marked trail. He told himself he was just exploring, following a stream that branched away from the main path. But as the hours passed and the forest grew denser, thicker, older, he admitted what he was really doing: disappearing. Not in the permanent sense, he wasn't suicidal, hadn't been even in his darkest moments. But he wanted to go somewhere the world couldn't find him, somewhere without cell reception or concerned calls or the weight of other people's expectations. By the 5th day, he'd pushed deeper into the forest than any recreational hiker had business going. The trees here were ancient Douglas firs that had been seedlings when Columbus sailed, their trunks so massive 3 men couldn't have circled them with linked arms. The canopy blocked so much light that the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight, soft and green and utterly still. That's when he found the tree. It stood in a small clearing, though clearing wasn't quite right. The space around it felt less like an opening and more like the forest paying respect. The tree was a Douglas fir, but ancient beyond measure, its trunk easily 40 feet across. The bark was deeply furrowed, almost sculptural, and the branches didn't start until 70 feet up, spreading like a cathedral ceiling against the sky. But what stopped Aldric in his tracks wasn't the tree itself, it was what had been built into it. The trunk was partially hollow, something that happened sometimes to very old trees, creating a natural cavity. But someone had transformed that cavity into something impossible: a cabin. Not a treehouse perched in branches, but an actual structure built within the hollow of the trunk itself, as if the tree had grown around it or welcomed it into its heart. Wooden steps had been carved and attached to the bark, spiraling up about 12 feet to a small platform. A door, real wood with iron hinges, stood closed in what should have been solid trunk. Windows had been cut and fitted with glass that reflected the forest light. A small chimney pipe emerged from somewhere higher up, disappearing into the branches above. Aldric approached slowly, half convinced he was hallucinating from dehydration or exhaustion. He touched the steps. Solid, weathered but maintained, the wood still strong. He climbed, his heart pounding, not from exertion but from pure disbelief. The door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was small but complete, maybe 12 feet in diameter, following the natural curve of the hollow trunk. The walls were the tree itself, the living wood, smooth and preserved. A small wood stove sat in the center, its pipe leading up through a carefully cut opening. Built-in shelves lined one section of the curved wall, filled with jars of dried herbs, roots, and preserved foods. A narrow sleeping loft accessed by a ladder took up one half of the upper space. A small table and 2 chairs occupied the floor space, along with a reading chair positioned by the window. Everything was handmade, crafted with skill and care. The furniture showed the marks of hand tools, each joint fitted perfectly. The shelves contained not just food, but books, journals, and what looked like medical supplies. Dried plants hung from hooks in the ceiling, herbs Aldric didn't recognize, but which filled the space with a faint, pleasant scent. On the reading table, positioned as if waiting for him, sat a leather-bound journal. Aldric stood in the doorway for a long moment, feeling like an intruder in a sacred space. But exhaustion and curiosity finally overrode his hesitation. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and picked up the journal. The first page, written in careful block letters, read, "My name is Garrett Moss. If you're reading this, you needed to find this place. Welcome." Aldric spent the first night in the cabin reading by lamplight, an oil lamp he'd found filled and ready on the shelf, as if Garrett Moss had known someone would eventually need it. The journal entries began in March 1987. Garrett's handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, the letters formed with the careful control of someone who'd learned to steady their hands through sheer will. "Spent 14 months building this place," the first entry read. "Took another 6 to stop jumping at every sound the forest made. The doctors said I had PTSD. I told them I had Vietnam. Same thing, they said. It isn't. Vietnam is a place. PTSD is what happens when that place moves into your head and won't leave." Over 3 days, Aldric barely left the cabin except to collect water from a spring Garrett had described 50 yards north, marked by stacked stones. The spring fed into a system Garrett had built, clever and simple, that provided running water to a small sink inside. Solar panels hidden in the canopy above, installed years after the cabin's initial construction, according to later entries, provided enough power for a few LED lights and a small refrigeration unit. Garrett had been a medic in Vietnam, drafted at 19, served 3 years in field hospitals and evacuation units. He'd seen things that no amount of description could adequately convey, though his journal entries tried. Not the gore. He never detailed the wounds or the dying, but the weight of it, the impossibility of saving everyone. The way death became routine until the day it suddenly wasn't, and you realized you'd forgotten how to feel anything at all. He'd come home in 1973 to a wife and a young daughter. For 5 years, he'd tried to be normal, tried to hold a job, be a father, sleep through the night without waking his wife with his screaming. The journal entries from those years were sparse, recorded much later as memory rather than real-time documentation. "I wasn't a good husband," he wrote. "I wasn't a good father. I was a ghost, wearing their husband and father's face." His wife had left him in 1978, taken their daughter Simone to California. Garrett didn't blame her. "She deserved someone who could be present," he wrote. "I was still in the jungle." For the next 9 years, he drifted construction work, odd jobs, periods of homelessness. He drank, though he documented this without self-pity. Just fact. He got into fights. He spent a night in jail for disturbing the peace. He thought about suicide more often than he thought about living. Then in 1986, on a construction job in the Cascades, he'd found this tree during a lunch break, walked into the forest to get away from the noise of the crew, and stumbled into this clearing. The tree had been partially hollow even then, struck by lightning decades or centuries before. The heartwood burned out, but the tree still living, still growing. "I sat against it for 2 hours," Garrett wrote. "First time in 13 years I felt quiet inside. Decided right then I wasn't leaving. Took me 2 months to get fired for not showing up. Best firing of my life." He'd spent 1,986 and 1,987 building the cabin, learning carpentry through trial and error, hauling materials from a road 10 miles west. The work had saved him, he wrote. Not cured him, he was careful about that distinction, but given him something to build instead of destroy. On the 4th day of his stay, Aldric found the second journal. It was different from the first, less about Garrett's history and more about his daily life. Routines, observations, and scattered through the entries, appearing first in 1989, mentions of visitors. Man showed up today, early 30s, looked like hell. Said he'd been hiking for a week, got lost. Didn't smell lost to me, smelled like running. Gave him food, a place to sleep in the loft. Didn't ask questions. Figure he'll tell me what he needs to tell me or he won't. The entry 3 days later. He left this morning. Told me he'd been planning to walk into the woods and not come back. His wife died in a car accident 6 months ago. Said something about this place made him think maybe he could keep going. I didn't do anything special, just gave him space to breathe. More visitors appeared in the journals over the following years. Not many, maybe one every few months, but consistent. Lost hikers who found the cabin by accident. People running from lives that had become unbearable. A woman escaping an abusive marriage. A teenager who'd run away from foster care. A veteran, like Garrett, who couldn't make the civilian world make sense anymore. Garrett never advertised, never told anyone where he was. But somehow, people found him. The forest brings who it brings, he wrote. I just provide shelter and shut up long enough for them to hear themselves think. On his 5th day in the cabin, Aldric discovered the visitor's log in a drawer beneath the sink. It was a simple notebook, the kind students used for class notes, but its pages held something precious. Each entry followed a similar format, a first name or initial, a date, and a brief note. The earliest entry was dated July 1989. 3 days here. Thank you for the silence and the soup. The 15th of July, 1989. Patricia, you didn't judge me. That meant everything. The 3rd of October, 1989. I came here to die. I'm leaving to live. The 22nd of March, 1990. Page after page of them, spanning from 1989 to November 1994. Aldric read each one, these small testimonies from strangers who'd found refuge in this impossible place. Some entries were longer, more detailed. Others were just a name and date, as if the person couldn't find words adequate to what they'd experienced here. One entry, dated April 1992, stopped Aldric cold. Douglas, 54 years old. My wife died 8 months ago. I didn't think I'd ever feel human again. Garrett, you didn't fix me. No one can fix this, but you showed me that broken doesn't mean finished. Thank you. The 18th of April, 1992. Aldric read it 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. 54, wife, dead. It could have been his own entry, written 30 years in the past, by a different man living the same grief. That evening, as the forest darkened and the cabin's lamp cast warm light against the curved walls, Aldric heard footsteps on the wooden stairs outside. His first instinct was fear he was trespassing, after all, living in someone else's space without permission. But the footsteps were slow, hesitant, and when the knock came, it was soft, almost apologetic. Aldric opened the door. A woman stood on the small platform, mid-30s, her face drawn with exhaustion. Her clothes were wrong, for serious hiking, running shoes instead of boots, a light jacket, insufficient for mountain nights. Her backpack was small, probably meant for day trips. Her eyes held the particular kind of desperation Aldric had seen in the bathroom mirror for 3 months. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I saw the light. I've been walking for 2 days and I'm lost and I don't—" Her voice cracked. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Aldric stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "Come in," he said. "You're safe here." She climbed inside, and as Aldric closed the door behind her, he realized something had shifted. He was no longer just a grieving man hiding in the forest. Garrett Moss had created something here, something that had outlived him by decades, and now it was asking Aldric a question he hadn't expected to face. What are you going to do with this? The woman's name was Petra, and she sat in Garrett's reading chair, accepting the cup of herbal tea Aldric had made from jars on the shelf, and began to cry. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that ran down her face while she sipped the tea and stared at the curved wooden walls. Aldric didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He made soup from dried vegetables and beans he'd found in storage, following recipes Garrett had written on index cards tucked between the jars. He gave Petra a blanket and showed her the sleeping loft. He maintained the same quiet presence Garrett had described in his journals, not fixing, not counseling, just being present while someone else remembered how to breathe. That night, lying on the floor while Petra slept above, Aldric stared at the ceiling and made a decision he hadn't known he was considering. He would stay. Not forever, he didn't know about forever, but long enough to understand what Garrett had built here, long enough to see if he, too, could become someone who helped rather than just hurt. Petra stayed for 3 days, and in that time, Aldric learned more about silence than he'd understood in 53 years of life. She didn't talk much that first day, just slept, woke to eat the simple meals Aldric prepared, then retreated back to the loft. He could hear her moving up there sometimes, restless but contained, like an animal checking the boundaries of a safe den. On the second day she came down, while Aldric was examining Garrett's collection of dried herbs. Jars lined an entire shelf, each labelled in Garrett's careful handwriting: chamomile, valerian root, street John's wort, passion flower, skullcap. Beside the jars sat a hand-bound book, its pages filled with detailed illustrations and notes. Garrett's Medicinal Herb Guide, the title page read. The drawings were surprisingly skilled, each plant rendered in careful detail, showing leaves, stems, flowers, and roots. Beside each illustration, Garrett had written properties, preparations, and dosages. For anxiety and sleeplessness, valerian root tea, 1 teaspoon dried roots steeped 15 minutes, calms without dulling. Petra watched him read. "You're not Garrett," she said. It wasn't a question. "No. I found this place 6 days ago. Garrett died a long time ago, I think." Aldric showed her the journals, the dates of the entries. "I'm just staying here for a while." She nodded slowly, processing this. "But you let me in anyway. Seemed like the right thing to do." Petra sat at the small table, her fingers tracing the wood grain. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Was a nurse. Portland Medical Center. 10 years. She paused, gathering words. "The pandemic broke something in me, not dramatically, just slowly, patient after patient, and nothing we did was enough. Then my marriage fell apart because I was never home, or I was home but not really present. Then I just started driving one day. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Ended up at a trailhead and started walking. Aldric prepared tea using Garrett's guide, mixing chamomile and passion flower. The ritual of it felt important somehow, measuring, steeping, serving. Small acts of care that didn't require fixing anything. "You came here planning to die?" he asked gently. "No. Maybe. I don't know." Petra accepted the tea, inhaled the steam. "I came here planning to disappear. Turns out that's a kind of dying too." They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the forest conducted its ancient business, birds calling, wind moving through branches, the distant sound of water over stone. Inside, the cabin held its own, quiet, thick, and comforting like a wool blanket. "Tell me about Garrett," Petra said eventually. So Aldric did. He shared what he'd learned from the journals, the war, the trauma, the years of wandering, the decision to build this place. He told her about the visitors, the pattern of helping, the philosophy of presence over preaching. When he finished, Petra asked to see the visitor's log. She read it slowly, page by page. And when she reached the entry from the suicidal teenager in 1989, a 16-year-old who'd stayed for 10 days and wrote, "You taught me that surviving is different from living. I'm going to try living now," she began to cry again. "He saved all these people," she whispered. "He gave them space to save themselves," Aldric corrected. "I think there's a difference." On the third day, Petra and Aldric established a routine without discussing it. He woke early, started coffee on the wood stove. She came down and they ate breakfast together, oatmeal with dried berries, honey from jars Garrett must have traded for years ago. They washed dishes in the spring water, then Petra read, while Aldric explored the immediate area around the cabin. He found things Garrett had built. A small garden plot, overgrown now but still showing the structure of raised beds. A fire pit with stones arranged for optimal heat and minimal smoke. A composting system. A rain catch connected to the cabin's water system. The man had been entirely self-sufficient, creating something sustainable rather than just survivable. That afternoon, Petra found him sitting by Garrett's grave. Aldric had discovered it the day before, a simple stone marker 100 yards east. Garrett Moss, 1948 to 1994. Found peace. "When I go back," Petra said, sitting beside him, "I'm going to get help. Real help. Therapy, maybe medication. I can't do it alone anymore." "That's wise. But I needed this first. This place. This quiet." She looked at the cabin visible through the trees. "It reminded me that I'm still a person under all the breaking. Does that make sense?" "More than you know." She left the next morning, her small pack restocked with food from the cabin's stores. Before descending the wooden steps, she turned back. "What's your name? I just realized you never told me." "Aldric. Aldric." She tested it, smiled slightly. "Thank you, Aldric, for continuing what Garrett started." "I'm not," he began. But she was already adding her entry to the visitor's log, her handwriting neat despite her. Trembling hands. "Petra, this place saved me. Thank you, stranger. September 28. After she left, the cabin felt larger and lonelier than it had before. Aldric cleaned compulsively, swept floors that weren't dirty, reorganized shelves that needed no organizing. He was avoiding the central question her departure had raised. Was he going to do this? Actually do this? Stay here and welcome strangers and try to offer what Garrett had offered? He had no training, no credentials. He was just a middle-aged man with architectural experience and fresh grief. What qualified him to help anyone? The answer came 2 days later when he heard footsteps again, heavier this time, unsteady on the stairs. The man who knocked was probably 50, with grey stubble and bloodshot eyes. He smelled of whiskey and desperation, and when Aldric opened the door, the man swayed slightly. "I heard about this place," he slurred. "Town down the mountain. Old guys at the bar, talking about the tree cabin where the pointed hermit helps people." He laughed bitterly. "I'm not people anymore. I'm just a drunk who got fired for being drunk. But I got nowhere else to go." Every instinct told Aldric to turn him away. This wasn't like Petra, quiet and receptive. This was messy, complicated, possibly dangerous. But he thought of Garrett's entries about the difficult visitors, the ones who tested his patience and commitment. "What's your name?" Aldric asked. "Bernard, Bernie, whatever." "Come inside, Bernard. There's coffee and food. You can sleep in the loft." Bernard stumbled in, looked around with confused wonder. "This is real?" "People said it was real, but I thought." He didn't finish, just sank into the reading chair and put his face in his hands. Aldric made coffee, strong and black. He didn't offer advice or judgment. He simply sat across from Bernard and waited, the way he imagined Garrett would have. It took 3 days before Bernard spoke more than fragments. 3 days of surly silence, of drinking coffee instead of whiskey, of sleeping 12 hours at a stretch. On the 4th day, he asked to read Garrett's journals. Aldric hesitated, then handed them over. Bernard read all morning, and when he looked up, his eyes were clearer than they'd been since arriving. "He was like me," Bernard said. "Garrett. The drinking, the anger, all of it." "Yes." But he stopped. He found a reason to stop, something that mattered more than the drinking. Bernard was quiet for a long time. Then, "I was a teacher. High school history. 22 years. Got fired 6 months ago for showing up drunk. Lost my wife a year before that, not to death, just to me being me. My kids don't talk to me. I'm 51 years old and I've got nothing." "You've got right now," Aldric said. "That's not nothing." They spent that afternoon identifying plants, using Garrett's guide, walking the forest around the cabin. Bernard surprised them both by knowing several species. He'd been an Eagle Scout as a kid. He explained, before life got complicated. The activity settled something in him, gave his hands something to do besides shake. By the end of the first week, Bernard had asked to stay longer. By day 12, he'd been sober for 10 days, the longest stretch in 2 years. He left his flask hidden in the loft, telling Aldric, "If I take it with me, I'll drink it. Leave it here. Maybe that'll help." The morning Bernard departed, he wrote in the visitor's log, "Bernard, 51. You didn't judge me. You just gave me space to remember who I used to be. Going to try being him again. October 12." After he'd gone, Aldric sat at the table and opened a fresh journal, one of several blank ones he'd found in Garrett's supplies. On the first page, he wrote, "My name is Aldric Vonn. I came here to disappear. Instead, I found people who needed the same thing I did, a place to be broken without shame. Garrett, I hope I'm doing this right." He wasn't sure he was, but he was trying, and somehow that felt like enough. 3 weeks into his stay, Aldric had helped 6 people, and the cabin had become something he no longer thought of as Garrett's. It was simply home. The rhythm of it surprised him. Days would pass in solitude, and he'd fall into maintenance routines, gathering firewood, tending the overgrown garden beds, purifying water, reading Garrett's journals for the 3rd or 4th time. Then footsteps would sound on the stairs, a knock would come, and the cabin would fill with someone else's crisis, someone else's desperate need for silence and safety. He learned to read people in those first moments at the door. The ones who talked too much were usually running from something specific, a job loss, a divorce, a mistake that felt unforgivable. The quiet ones carried deeper wounds, things that had been with them so long they'd become part of their identity. Both kinds needed the same thing, to be seen without being fixed. His children called. Occasionally, Aldric had discovered that if he hiked 2 miles northeast to a rocky outcropping, his phone caught enough signal for brief conversations. Brennan remained skeptical and worried, asking pointed questions about when Aldric planned to return. Lydia was gentler but no less concerned, reminding him that isolation wasn't healthy, that he should consider therapy, that running away didn't solve anything. Aldric didn't argue. How could he explain that he wasn't running away anymore? That for the first time since Helen's death, he felt like he was moving toward something rather than just away from pain. On a cold morning in mid-October, Aldric was organizing the medical supplies, basic first aid items Garrett had accumulated when he found a metal box tucked behind the jars of herbs. Inside were papers, old and carefully folded, the deed to the property. His hands shook as he unfolded the documents. 40 acres surrounding the ancient tree, purchased by Garrett Moss in 1986 for $12,000 from a Bow timber company. The deed was clean, legal, properly filed, and attached to it a transfer document dated 1995. Property transferred upon death to Simone Moss, daughter, current address Seattle, Washington. Aldric sat heavily in the reading chair. Someone owned this land, Garrett's daughter, a daughter who, according to the journals, Garrett hadn't seen since 1978. A daughter who had inherited this place 29 years ago, and Aldric checked the attached tax receipts, all paid, and current had been maintaining it ever since. But she'd never come here. In 29 years, she'd paid taxes, kept the property legal, but never visited. The cabin showed no signs of maintenance beyond what weather and time demanded. No fresh supplies beyond what Garrett had left. Nothing to suggest she'd ever set foot in this place. Why? Why keep paying for land you never used? Why not sell it, or at least visit? The questions haunted him through the day. That evening, he found more answers in a box he'd previously overlooked, a collection of letters, unsealed, unfinished, written in Garrett's hand, but never sent. "Dear Simone," the first one began, dated April 1987. "I know I have no right to contact you after everything I put you and your mother through. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. I built something. It's not much, but it's honest. I hope someday you'll understand why I had to leave civilization behind. Love, Dad." Another, from 1989. "Dear Simone, I helped someone today. A kid your age, maybe a little older. He was lost in ways that had nothing to do with trails or maps. I think about you every time someone that age shows up. I wonder if you ever feel lost. I wonder if you have anyone to help you. I should have been that person. I'm sorry I wasn't." Letter after letter, spanning years, all saying variations of the same thing. "I'm sorry. I love you. I understand if you can't forgive me. I hope you're happy." None of them sent, just folded, carefully and stored away, as if Garrett couldn't quite bring himself to bridge the gap, but couldn't stop trying either. The last letter was dated October 1994, the handwriting shakier than the earlier ones. "Simone, I waited too long. I thought I had more time. I thought someday I'd be worthy of your forgiveness. But time doesn't care about worthy. I'm sorry for every moment I wasn't the father you deserved. The property is yours now. Do with it what feels right. Maybe someday you'll come see what I built. Maybe you won't. Either way, know that everything good I did here, I did thinking of you. Love always, Dad." Aldric read that letter 3 times, tears blurring his vision. Here was Garrett's greatest failure, the one wound he'd never healed. He'd helped dozens of strangers, but he'd died without ever reconciling with his own daughter. That night, lying awake, Aldric thought about Brennan and Lydia, how easily he could slip into the same pattern, helping strangers while losing his own family. How seductive it was to hide in this noble isolation, to give himself completely to people who would leave after a few days, who couldn't demand the complicated, sustained intimacy that family required. The next morning, he hiked to the outcropping and called Lydia. When she answered, he didn't wait for pleasantries. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I found a place in the forest, a cabin. The man who built it used to help people who were lost or hurting. He's gone now, but people still find this place. I've been helping them. I know it sounds strange, but it's the first thing that's felt right since your mother died." Silence on the other end, then Lydia's careful voice. "Dad, are you safe?" "Yes, I promise. I'm safe, I'm eating, I'm not in danger." "Are you alone?" "Most of the time. Sometimes people show up and stay a few days. It's hard to explain." Another pause. "You sound different. Not happy exactly, but less hollow." Aldric supplied. "Yes, less hollow." He could hear the relief in her voice mixed with worry. "Can I visit? I need to see this place, see that you're really okay. Give me a month. I need to. There are things I need to understand first. But yes, please visit." They talked for another 20 minutes, and when they hung up, Aldric felt lighter. He wasn't shutting his children out. He was asking for time, not forever. 2 days later, a young man arrived at dusk. His name was Felix, and within an hour, Aldric realized this was different from every previous visitor. Felix was in active withdrawal from opioids, sweating, shaking, aggressive one moment, and terrified the next. "I need to get clean," Felix gasped, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. "My girlfriend gave me an ultimatum. Either I get clean or she's gone. I can't do a clinic. I can't do meetings. I just need somewhere away from everything. Aldric felt panic rising. This was beyond his knowledge. Garrett's herb guide had entries on anxiety and insomnia, but nothing about opioid withdrawal, which he knew could be dangerous. Felix needed medical supervision, real help. But when he suggested going to a hospital, Felix became hostile. If I go to a hospital, I'm not coming back. I'll use again before I even get there. This place, people said this place could help. That night was the longest of Aldric's life. Felix cycled through sweating and chills, nausea and paranoia. He paced, he shouted, he curled into a ball and shook. Aldric stayed awake, made tea that Felix sometimes drank and sometimes threw, talked in low, steady tones when Felix needed to hear another voice, and sat in silence when words seemed to make things worse. By dawn, Felix had exhausted himself into an uneasy sleep. Aldric sat at the table, his hands trembling from adrenaline and fear, and faced a hard truth: he couldn't do this alone. Garrett might have been able to, with his medical training and years of experience. But Aldric was just a man, with good intentions, and good intentions wouldn't be enough if someone died under his watch. Felix stayed for 10 days, slowly stabilizing. On the 9th day, he was lucid enough to really talk. "I need real help after this," Felix said. "A program, therapy, the whole thing, but I needed to start somewhere I felt safe. Thank you for giving me that." After Felix left with contact information for several treatment centers Aldric had researched during a supply run to the nearest town, Aldric sat with the reality of his situation. He needed help, resources, knowledge he didn't have. The question was, how could he get those things while keeping this place, this mission, alive? Aldric made his first trip to the town of Ridgemont on a Tuesday morning in early November, leaving before dawn to make the 15-mile hike before the stores closed. The town was small, the kind of place where a single main street held everything necessary for survival: a general store, a diner, a post office, a gas station, and a bar that probably saw more business than all the others combined. Aldric felt exposed walking down that street, aware of the stares from locals who could spot an outsider instantly. He bought supplies at the general store: proper first aid materials, water purification tablets, batteries for the solar system, basic food staples. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, rang up his purchases without comment until he added a book on wilderness medicine to the pile. "You that fellow staying up at the tree cabin?" she asked. Aldric hesitated, then nodded. "Word travels. In a town of 300, everything travels." She bagged his items. "Garrett Moss was a good man. Helped my nephew back in '92. Kid was mess. Came back different. Better. I'm just staying there temporarily." She looked at him with an expression that suggested she knew better. That's what Garrett said too. Temporary turned into 8 years. She handed him the bag. "There's a clinic 40 miles south if you need a real doctor. And the sheriff's wife runs an addiction counseling service out of the church basement every Thursday. Good people. They know about the cabin." The information settled over Aldric like a map filling in blank spaces. This place wasn't as isolated as he'd thought. People knew. They'd known for decades. The cabin existed in a strange space between secret and legend, not advertised, but not hidden either. At the diner, he ordered coffee and a sandwich, and overheard 2 men at the counter talking. "Heard someone's up there again," one said. Jimmy saw smoke from the chimney when he was checking his trapline. "Same as always," the other replied. "Every few years, someone takes it over for a while. Never lasts, though. Too isolated, too much responsibility." Garrett was different. He stayed. Garrett was crazy. Good crazy, but still. Aldric ate his sandwich and said nothing, but the conversation confirmed what the clerk had suggested. The cabin had a history beyond Garrett. People expected someone to be there. They accepted it as part of the landscape, like the mountain or the forest itself. Before leaving town, Aldric bought a satellite phone with a prepaid plan, expensive but necessary. If someone arrived in real crisis medical emergency, severe mental health episode, he needed to be able to call for help immediately, not wait for a 2-mile hike to questionable cell reception. The hike back took longer, weighed down with supplies. He reached the cabin after dark, exhausted but feeling more prepared. The satellite phone went on the shelf next to the first aid kit, a small red light blinking to show it was charged and ready. That night, he updated his journal. Garrett died alone, isolated from the people and systems that might have helped him and helped the people he served. I won't make that mistake. This work matters, but it can't exist in a vacuum. The next morning, he found something he'd somehow missed before. A bundle of letters tied with string, tucked into a hollowed-out section of the wall behind a loose board. Unlike the unsent letters to Simone, these were addressed and stamped, never mailed but prepared to be. They were from visitors. Thank you letters written to Garrett, dated over the years, some several pages long, others just a few sentences. Letters from people months or years after their stays, updating him on their lives, their progress, their gratitude. One letter from someone named Ruth, dated 1993. Dear Garrett, I stayed with you for 5 days last spring when I was ready to end my life. You never told me not to. You never said it would get better. You just gave me space to exist without judgment. I'm writing to tell you I'm still here. I got help, real therapy, medication that works. I have a job now. I adopted a dog. Small things, but they matter. You gave me enough hope to find the rest. Thank you. Another, from a man named Douglas, the same. Douglas, whose entry in the visitor's log had struck Aldric so deeply, dated 3 months after his visit. Garrett, I'm learning to live with loss instead of being destroyed by it. Your cabin showed me that broken isn't the same as worthless. I'm seeing a grief counselor. I'm talking to my kids again. I'm not okay yet, but I'm trying, and that's more than I had when I found you. Letter after letter, evidence that Garrett's work had extended far beyond those few days in the cabin. He'd been the first step in longer journeys of healing, not the destination but the beginning. Aldric read them all twice, then carefully retied the bundle and returned it to its hiding place. He understood now what Garrett had built, not a solution but a threshold, a place between breaking and beginning to heal. That afternoon, while splitting firewood, Aldric heard footsteps. A park ranger emerged from the tree line, older, maybe 65, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. Afternoon, the ranger said. Name's Gerald. I manage this section of forest. Aldric set down the axe, suddenly aware of his ambiguous legal status. Aldric Vonn. Gerald looked at the cabin, at the neat stacks of firewood, at the maintained paths around the clearing. You've been taking care of the place. Trying to. How many people have you helped so far? The directness of the question caught Aldric off guard. 8. Maybe 9, depending on how you count. Gerald nodded slowly. Garrett helped 47 in the 8 years he was here. I kept track. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, showed pages of dates and initials. Part of my job was knowing who was in the forest. After a while, I learned to let the cabin be. Garrett was doing good work. Did you know him? Some. He'd come to town once a month for supplies. We'd talk. He showed me his journals once, explained what he was trying to do. Gerald's expression softened. When he died, heart attack found him in his chair by the window. I'm the one who carried him out. Notified his daughter. Simone, you've been doing your research. Gerald sat on a stump, gestured for Aldric to join him. She's known someone was here for about 6 weeks now. Trail camera on the access path. She called my office asking questions. Aldric's stomach tightened. Is she going to evict me? Don't know. But she's coming here. 3 days from now. Wanted me to give you notice. Gerald studied Aldric carefully. She's protected this land for 30 years. Turned down 3 separate offers from developers. Whatever her issues with her father, she's honored what he built. I think she just wants to understand who you are and why you're here. After Gerald left, Aldric spent the evening in a state of controlled panic. Everything he'd found here, the purpose, the peace, the sense of mattering, could end in 3 days with a simple legal eviction. He had no claim to this place, no right to be here. Just Garrett's legacy and his own desperate need for something to hold on to. He thought about running, packing up, and disappearing before Simone arrived. But that felt like betrayal of Garrett, of the work, of the people who might still find this place and need it. Instead, he cleaned. He documented everything he'd done, every person he'd helped. He wrote a long letter to Simone explaining his presence, his intentions, his commitment to honoring what Garrett had created. On the 3rd day, at sunset, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Steady, confident footsteps. Aldric opened the door. The woman standing there was in her early 60s, with Garrett's sharp cheekbones and the same grey-green eyes Aldric had seen in the single photograph tucked into Garrett's journal. She wore practical hiking clothes, carried a proper pack, and looked at him with an expression that held decades of complicated emotion. "I'm Simone Moss," she said, "and you're living in my father's cabin." Simone didn't enter immediately. She stood on the platform, her eyes moving slowly across the cabin's interior, the wood stove with its steady heat, the shelves with their organized supplies, the reading chair positioned exactly as Garrett had left it. Her face revealed nothing, but her hands gripped the doorframe with enough pressure to whiten her knuckles. "May I come in?" she asked finally. Aldric stepped back. "Of course. It's your property." She climbed inside, set her pack carefully against the wall, and walked a slow circuit of the space. She touched things: the edge of the table, the curve of the wall where the tree's living wood showed through, the spines of books on the shelf. When she reached the reading chair, she stopped and simply stared at it for a long moment. "He died here," she said quietly. "In this chair. Looking out that window." "I know," Gerald told me. "Did he tell you I never came?" "Not when they found him. Not for the funeral. Not once in 30 years. She turned. "To face Aldric. I'm not a good daughter. I want you to know that up front." Aldric gestured to the table. "Would you like tea? Coffee?" "Tea. Whatever's there." He prepared chamomile and passion flower, using Garrett's method, the ritual giving him something to do with his hands. Simone sat at the table, her posture rigid, her gaze distant. When he set the cup in front of her, she wrapped both hands around it but didn't drink. "I was 8 when they divorced," she said without preamble. "My father came back from Vietnam and he wasn't my father anymore. He was someone else wearing my father's face. He'd rage or go silent for days. He drank. He'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. My mother tried for 5 years, but eventually she had to choose between saving him and saving me. She chose me." Aldric sat across from her and waited. "I hated him," Simone continued. "For years, I hated him. Then I got older, learned about PTSD, about what war does to people, and the hate turned into something more complicated. Guilt, maybe, or pity. Neither of those felt right either." She finally sipped the tea. "He tried to reach out in the 80s. Letters, phone calls. I refused all of it. I was in law school, building my life, and I didn't want him contaminating it with his problems. That's understandable. Is it?" Her eyes were hard. "When my mother called in 1994 to tell me he'd died, she told me about this place, about the cabin he'd built, about the people he'd helped. She said he'd left me the property in his will. I thought it was a joke, a final manipulation, making me responsible for his mess. But you kept it. I kept it." She set down the cup, out of guilt, out of spite, out of some twisted sense that destroying it would make me worse than him. "I paid the taxes every year, put trail cameras on the access points, told myself I was just maintaining an asset, but I never came. I couldn't." Her voice caught. I couldn't face what he'd become when he left. Me. Aldric reached across the table, not touching but offering the possibility. He never stopped thinking about you. There are letters. I know. Gerald mentioned them. I don't. She stood abruptly, walked to the window. Why are you here? Really? What are you running from? The question was sharp, almost accusatory. Aldric considered deflecting, then decided on honesty. My wife died 3 months ago. Cancer. 25 years of marriage, and then nothing. My children have their own lives. I had a job that meant nothing, and an apartment full of furniture she picked out. I came to the forest to disappear. I found this place instead, and decided to play therapist to strangers. I decided to continue what your father started, to give people what he gave them, space to exist without judgment. Simone turned from the window. You have no training, no credentials, no legal protection. Do you understand the liability? If someone hurts themselves here, if someone dies, I know the risks. Do you? Because my father died alone, no family, no medical care, just him and his mission. Her voice rose. He chose this place over having a daughter, over reconciliation, over everything. And now you're doing the same thing, hiding from your real life, pretending that helping strangers absolves you of helping yourself. The words hit like physical blows. Aldric stood, his own anger rising. Your father spent 8 years doing meaningful work. He helped dozens of people who had nowhere else to go. Maybe he failed you, and I'm sorry for that. But what he built here mattered. To everyone but his own child. They stood facing each other, the cabin suddenly too small for the weight of their combined pain and anger. Then Simone's shoulders sagged, and she sat heavily in the reading chair, her father's chair. I saw the trail camera footage 6 weeks ago, she said quietly. Someone maintaining the cabin, welcoming visitors. I thought maybe it was a squatter or vandals, but Gerald said you were helping people, just like my father did. She looked up at Aldric. I needed to understand who you were, whether you were just another damaged man using this place to avoid dealing with his real problems. And your verdict? I don't know yet. She closed her eyes. Show me his journals. Show me what he wrote. Aldric retrieved all of Garrett's journals, the visitor's log, and the bundle of unsent letters. He placed them on the table, then moved to give Simone space. She opened the first journal slowly, as if it might burn her. For the next hour, she read in silence. Aldric busied himself with small tasks, stoking the fire, organizing supplies, anything to avoid watching Simone as she encountered her father's words, his pain, his slow transformation. He heard her breath catch several times, saw her wipe her eyes, but he didn't intrude. When she finally looked up, her face was blotchy with tears. He wrote about me in almost every entry. He never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped hoping you'd come. But he never sent the letters. Never picked up a phone. Never. She stopped, shook her head. Why didn't he just try harder? Maybe he thought he didn't deserve forgiveness, or maybe he was protecting you from his pain. Aldric sat across from her again. I don't know. But I think he spent 8 years trying to become someone worthy of being your father again. He just ran out of time. Simone pulled one journal closer, the final one. Can I read his last entry? Aldric found the page and handed her the journal. She read slowly, and when she reached the end, she read it again. Then, a third time. He knew he was dying, she whispered. Heart disease. He wrote about it a month before, and he stayed here. Alone. Yes. She closed the journal carefully, as if it was something precious and fragile. There's something you should have. Something he left. She stood, walked to a section of wall Aldric had never examined closely, and pressed on a board. It popped loose, revealing a hollowed space behind. Inside was a sealed envelope, written on it in Garrett's careful hand. For Simone, when she finally comes. I hope she does. Simone stared at it for a long moment, then took it with trembling hands. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked at Aldric. "I need to read this alone. I'm going to walk for a while." Don't wait up." She took the envelope and left, descending the stairs as the last light faded from the sky. Aldric listened to her footsteps fade into the forest, then sat at the table and put his head in his hands. Everything hung in balance now. Simone held the power to end this with a single decision. And Aldric realized, with sudden clarity, that he'd found something worth fighting for. Simone returned 2 hours later, her face composed, but her eyes red-rimmed in the lamplight. She climbed the steps slowly, and when Aldric opened the door, she was holding the opened letter in one hand. "He apologized," she said, "for everything." He explained the PTSD, the drinking, why he had to leave. He said building this place and helping people was his way of becoming the father he should have been. Her voice cracked slightly. "He said he was proud of me, that he followed my career from a distance, that he knew I became an environmental attorney, and it made sense I was always trying to save things." Aldric stepped aside to let her in. "Would you like to talk about it?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket. "But I need to stay here for a few days, understand what this place is, what my father built, what you're continuing." "Of course." She set up her sleeping bag in the loft, and they fell into an awkward coexistence. The next morning, they shared coffee in silence, the cabin heavy with unspoken things. Aldric went about his routines, checking the water system, splitting firewood, reviewing his journal notes. Simone watched from the reading chair, observing everything with the sharp attention of someone trained to notice details. That afternoon, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Aldric opened the door to find a teenage girl, maybe 16, with a torn backpack and clothes that had seen too many days of wear. Her eyes were wary, calculating the danger before committing to speaking. "Is this—" she started, then saw Simone inside and tensed. "Sorry, wrong place. Wait," Aldric said gently. "You're not wrong. Come in. You're safe here." The girl looked between them, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Who are you people?" "My name is Aldric. This is Simone. We're not going to hurt you, and we're not going to force you to do anything. But if you need food, water, a place to rest, we can offer that." She hesitated for a long moment, then climbed inside. Up close, Aldric could see she was exhausted, probably hadn't eaten well in days. Her arms showed faint bruises in various stages of healing. "What's your name?" Simone asked, her attorney's training evident in the careful, non-threatening tone. "Ren. Just Ren." Aldric prepared food while Simone and Ren sat at the table in tense silence. When he set down soup and bread, Ren ate ravenously, barely pausing for breath. After she'd finished 2 bowls, she finally spoke. "How did you find this place?" Simone asked. "Heard about it at a shelter in Portland. Someone said there was a cabin in the forest where people went when they needed to disappear. I've been hiking for 3 weeks trying to find it." "You're running from something," Aldric said. It wasn't a question. Ren's jaw tightened. "Foster home. 4th one. The dad." She stopped, shook her head. "I'm not going back. I'll sleep in the woods first." Simone leaned forward slightly. "How old are you?" 16. "You know, I have to report this. As an officer of the court, if I know a minor is in danger." Ren stood abruptly, grabbing her backpack. "Then I'm leaving." "Wait," Aldric said, but she was already at the door. "I knew this was a mistake," Ren said, her voice breaking. "There's no safe place." "Not really." She bolted down the stairs before either of them could stop her. Aldric and Simone exchanged a look, then both rushed after her. The forest was darkening, and the temperature was dropping. A teenage girl alone out here at night, especially one already exhausted and malnourished, was in serious danger. They split up, calling her name, pushing through underbrush as the last light faded. Aldric's heart pounded with fear and frustration. This was exactly what Simone had warned about, the gap between good intentions and real capability. He had no training for this, no legal authority, just a desire to help that might end with a girl dying of exposure because he'd scared her away. After 30 minutes of searching, he heard Simone's voice calling from the north. He pushed through the trees and found them by a stream. Simone, sitting on a fallen log, Ren sitting 10 feet away, both silent. "She won't talk to me," Simone said quietly when Aldric approached. "But she hasn't run again." Aldric sat on the ground between them, not too close to either. For several minutes, only the sound of water over stones filled the space. Finally, Simone spoke, her voice softer than before. "I ran away when I was 17. Did you know that, Aldric?" He shook his head, though Ren couldn't see the gesture in the darkness. "My father, the man who built that cabin, came back from Vietnam broken. He tried, but he couldn't be the father I needed. My mother left him, took me away. I spent years angry at both of them. When I was 17, I ran, lived in shelters for 3 months before my mother found me." She paused. "I'm not going to lie to you, Ren. The system is broken. Foster care fails kids every day. But there are people in that system trying to fix it. I know some of them." Ren's voice came from the darkness. "They'll just put me in another home, another family that gets paid to pretend to care. Maybe. Or maybe we find different options. Emancipation. A group home with better oversight. I can't promise easy solutions, but I can promise I'll fight for better than what you had." Simone's voice carried decades of courtroom authority, softened by genuine care. "But you have to come back with me, at least temporarily. And if I don't, then you'll probably die out here, and that's a waste of a life that's already survived too much." The brutal honesty seemed to reach Ren in a way comfort couldn't. After a long silence, she stood. "If I come back, can I stay at the cabin tonight? Just tonight. Tomorrow we can deal with the rest." "Yes," Aldric said. "And you can come back later, when things are more stable. This place will be here." Ren looked at him, her face barely visible in the darkness. "Will it? She owns it. She could tear it down tomorrow." All three of them turned to Simone. She stood slowly, and in the dim light, Aldric saw something shift in her expression, a decision being made in real time. "The cabin stays," Simone said. "My father built it for people like you, like all of us. It stays." They walked back together, and when they reached the cabin, Simone pulled out her satellite phone and made several calls to colleagues, to people she trusted in child services. By the time she finished, she had a plan, a temporary placement with a specialized foster family while they explored emancipation options. It would take a few days to arrange. Ren listened to all of this from the loft, where Aldric had given her blankets and tea. When Simone finished explaining, Ren's voice drifted down. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." "Because my father would have," Simone said, "and because it's the right thing to do." That night, with Ren asleep above, Simone pulled out a folder from her pack. Inside were legal documents, a stewardship agreement she'd drafted before coming. "I wrote this 6 weeks ago," she explained to Aldric. "Before I met you, before tonight. I've been planning this for a while, trying to figure out the right way forward." Aldric scanned the document. It outlined terms for him to become the legal caretaker of the property, living rights, maintenance responsibilities, and most importantly, a partnership with local mental health services for visitors in crisis. "My father did this alone, and it killed him," Simone said. "You don't have to. There's a counselor in Ridgemont, trained in crisis intervention, addiction, trauma. She's agreed to visit twice a month, provide consultation, supplies. I've also spoken to Gerald about formalizing some emergency protocols." "Why?" Aldric asked. "Why do all this?" "Because tonight showed me something. You care. But care isn't enough. You need support, structure, and there's one more condition." She pulled out another document. "Your children have to agree to be part of your support system." "I called your daughter Lydia yesterday," Aldric's head snapped up. "You what?" "I'm an attorney. I found her in about 10 minutes. We had a good conversation. She's worried about you, but she's also relieved you found something meaningful. She's planning to visit in 2 weeks. She needs to see this place, understand what you're doing, and you need to promise her that you won't isolate yourself the way my father did. Aldric stared at the documents, overwhelmed. You've been planning this entire time to let me stay? I've been planning to make sure whoever stayed could actually sustain this work without destroying themselves. Simone's expression softened. My father's legacy deserves better than martyrdom. It deserves to live and grow and help people in a way that doesn't require someone dying alone for it. From the loft, Wren's voice came softly. Can I see those papers? Simone climbed up, and they heard quiet conversation. After a few minutes, Wren descended carrying a battered notebook. She handed it to Aldric. I draw, she said. It's what I do. I want you to see. The notebook was filled with sketches, the city streets, shelters, faces of people she'd encountered, and scattered throughout, drawings of nature, trees, streams, birds. The work was remarkable, each image capturing something essential about its subject. On the last page, she'd drawn the cabin, though she'd only seen it for a few hours. She'd captured it perfectly, the ancient tree, the impossible integration of human shelter and natural growth, the sense of sanctuary. I draw what matters, Wren said quietly. This place matters. The next morning, Simone left with Wren, promising to return in 3 days with the finalized agreements and news about the placement. Aldric stood at the base of the tree and watched them disappear into the forest, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. Alone again, he read through the stewardship agreement carefully. The terms were fair, almost generous. He would have legal right to occupy the cabin, maintain it, and continue Garrett's work. In exchange, he agreed to basic safety protocols, regular check-ins with Simone, and cooperation with the mental health professional she'd arranged. Most importantly, a clause requiring him to maintain connection with his family, at least monthly contact, with visits encouraged. It was everything he needed and everything he'd been afraid to ask for. Structure without constraint. Support without interference. A way forward that didn't require him to sacrifice either his purpose or his family. He signed the document that evening, his signature looking small and uncertain next to the official legal language. But it was done. He was committed now, not just emotionally, but legally. This was no longer a temporary escape or a grief-driven impulse. It was a choice, formalized and real. 2 days later, as he was repairing the garden beds for spring planting, footsteps sounded on the path, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Aldric stood, suddenly anxious. But when the figures emerged from the trees, relief flooded through him. Lydia led the way, her expression determined but softening when she saw him. Behind her came her husband Marcus and their 2 children, Sophie, age 7, and Oliver, age 4. They stopped at the clearing's edge, taking in the massive tree and the impossible cabin within it. Dad, Lydia said, and there was wonder in her voice. You weren't kidding. The children rushed forward, their fear forgotten in the face of such a spectacular treehouse. Oliver reached the carved steps first, looking up with wide eyes. Can we go inside? Carefully, Aldric said, his throat tight with emotion. The steps are sturdy, but hold the railing. They climbed together, the whole family, and when they stepped into the cabin, Aldric saw it through their eyes, the curved walls of living wood, the careful craftsmanship, the sense of sanctuary built into every detail. Sophie touched the tree's interior surface with reverence, as if sensing something sacred. This is where you've been? Lydia asked, turning slowly to take it all in. This is what you've been doing. Aldric told them everything. About finding the cabin, reading Garrett's journals, the visitors who'd come seeking help. He showed them the visitor's log, let Lydia read some of the entries. He explained Simone, the agreement, the structure being put in place to make this sustainable. Marcus, quiet until now, examined the solar system, the water collection, the wood stove. This is impressive work, completely self-sufficient. Garrett spent years perfecting it. I'm just maintaining what he built. You're doing more than maintaining, Lydia said, reading the most recent entries in the log. Dad, you're helping people. Real people with real problems. I'm trying. She set down the log and faced him. Mom would be proud of you. You know that, right? The words hit harder than expected. Aldric had to look away, blinking back tears. I don't know. She'd probably think I was running away. Maybe at first. But this, Lydia gestured around the cabin. This is running towards something. There's a difference. They spent the day together, the children playing in the clearing while the adults talked. Marcus asked practical questions about supplies, safety, winter preparation. Lydia wanted to know about the mental health support Simone had arranged, the emergency protocols, how Aldric would handle situations beyond his capability. I won't pretend to understand everything you're doing, Lydia said as the afternoon wore on. But I see why it matters to you. I see that you're different than you were 3 months ago. Less hollow, Aldric supplied, remembering their phone conversation. Yes, less hollow. She took his hand. But you have to promise me you won't disappear into this, that you'll stay connected to us, to Brennan, that you won't make Garrett's mistakes. I promise. That's actually part of the legal agreement. Monthly contact minimum, visits encouraged. Simone sounds like a smart woman. She is. She's protecting her father's legacy better than he protected himself. Before they left, Sophie asked to draw a picture to leave in the cabin. Aldric gave her paper and pencils from the supplies, and she worked with serious concentration for 20 minutes. The result was a child's drawing of the tree cabin, with stick figures standing in front: Aldric, herself, Oliver, her parents. At the top, she'd written in careful letters, "Grandpa's magic tree." "Can you put it on the wall?" she asked. Aldric found tape and placed it carefully beside Garrett's herb illustrations. "It'll stay right here. And when you visit again, you can see it." "We're coming back?" Oliver asked, excited. "If your grandfather wants us," Marcus said, looking at Aldric with a question in his eyes. "Always," Aldric said. "You're always welcome here." After they left, the cabin felt larger, but less lonely. Their presence had changed something, had blessed the space with family connection in a way Garrett had never managed. Aldric sat in the reading chair that evening and updated his journal. "Lydia came today. She understands. I think Helen would approve. I think I'm finally doing something right." The next morning, Simone returned with final documents and news about Wren. The placement had been arranged, a specialized foster home run by a retired teacher who'd fostered over 30 kids. Wren would stay there while they pursued emancipation, which Simone thought had a good chance, given her age and circumstances. "She wants to visit during Thanksgiving," Simone said. "Is that all right?" "Of course. She's always welcome." Simone handed him the signed agreements, now official and notarized. "You're the legal caretaker now. The property is yours to maintain and occupy as long as you honor the done terms. Thank you for all of this, for not tearing it down, for making it sustainable. Thank you for continuing it." Simone walked to the window, looking out at the forest. "I spent 30 years hating my father for choosing this over me. But standing here now, seeing what he built, understanding what you're doing, I realize he didn't choose this. Instead of being my father, he chose this to become someone who could have been my father. He just ran out of time before he got there." "Do you forgive him?" She considered the question carefully. "I'm working toward it. That's the best I can do right now." She turned back to Aldric. "But I understand him better. And I'm grateful for what he left behind, even if he couldn't leave it to me directly." Before leaving, Simone placed her own entry in the visitor's log. "Simone Moss, daughter of Garrett Moss. It took me 30 years to come here. I wish I'd come sooner. Thank you, Dad, for building something that outlasted your mistakes. And Thank you, Aldric, for showing me what grace looks like. November 18. After she left, Aldric sat at the table and felt the full weight of what had happened. The cabin was secure. His family was connected. Support systems were in place. He had permission, legally and emotionally, to continue this work. A week later, a young man arrived just after dawn. He was in his late 20s, moving with the careful control of someone barely holding himself together. His eyes carried a haunted quality. Aldric recognized the specific darkness of war trauma. "My name is Lucien," he said. "I'm a veteran. Got back from deployment 3 months ago. Can't sleep. Can't stop seeing." He stopped, swallowed hard. Someone at the VA mentioned there might be a place in the forest where people go when they need quiet. Took me 2 weeks to find it. Aldric stepped aside, welcoming him in. "You found it. Come in, Lucien. You're safe here." As Lucien climbed inside and Aldric began preparing tea, he felt the full circle of it. Garrett had been a medic in Vietnam, had built this place to heal his own war wounds. Now, 50 years later, it was still offering shelter to soldiers trying to find peace. That evening, Lucien asked about the journals. Aldric gave him Garrett's first one, the one that detailed Vietnam and the long road toward healing. Lucien read late into the night, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "He made it through," Lucien said. "He actually made it through to something better. He did. It took time and it wasn't easy. But yes, do you think I can?" Aldric met his eyes directly. "I think you already started the moment you decided to find this place." That took courage. They talked until the fire burned low, about war and homecoming, about the gap between who you were and who you've become, about the slow work of rebuilding a life after trauma. Aldric didn't pretend to have answers, but he had presence and patience, and sometimes that was enough. 3 months passed, and winter settled over the forest with quiet authority. Snow came in late December, transforming the clearing into something from a storybook, the ancient tree crowned in white, smoke rising steadily from the cabin's chimney, icicles hanging like crystal ornaments from the lower branches. Aldric had helped 23 people by then, each one different, each carrying their own specific weight of pain or confusion or loss. Some stayed only a night, others remained for weeks. A few, like Bernard, came back for second visits when they felt themselves slipping and needed the cabin's particular form of shelter. The mental health counselor, Simone, had arranged a woman named Dr. Patricia Keene, visited twice monthly as promised. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and the no-nonsense competence of someone who'd spent 30 years in crisis intervention. She brought supplies, offered consultation on difficult cases, and most importantly, gave Aldric someone to talk to about the emotional toll of the work. "You're doing well," she told him during her January visit, warming her hands by the wood stove. "But you need to be careful about secondary trauma. You're absorbing everyone's pain. That adds up. I know. I journal about it. Talk to Simone. My daughter visits monthly now." "Good. Keep that up." Garrett didn't have those support systems, and it cost him. Patricia sipped the tea he'd made. "You're building something more sustainable than what he had. That matters." Brennan had finally visited in December, skeptical and worried, but gradually warming as he saw the cabin, read some of the journals, understood what his father was actually doing. He hadn't fully accepted it, still thought Aldric should consider returning to normal life, but he'd stopped arguing. "If this is what you need right now, Dad, okay," Brennan had said before leaving. "Just promise me you're not going to live in a tree forever." "I can't promise forever," Aldric had replied. "But I can promise I'll stay connected to you, that I won't disappear." It was the best they could manage, and it was enough. Wren visited during Thanksgiving as planned, transformed in ways both visible and subtle. She'd gained weight, looked healthier. But more than that, she carried herself differently, less defensive, more open. The emancipation process was moving forward. She'd enrolled in an alternative high school with an arts focus and was thriving. She'd brought her sketchbook, now filled with new work. "I'm applying to art schools," she told Aldric. "Real ones. With scholarships." She showed him a series of drawings, detailed studies of urban landscapes, portraits of people from the shelter, and scattered throughout, images of the forest and cabin. "My portfolio theme is sanctuary, about finding safe places in an unsafe world. These are remarkable, Wren. The cabin is in, like, half of them." She looked almost embarrassed. "It changed my life. I needed to document it." Before leaving, she gave him one of the drawings, a portrait of Aldric himself, sitting in the reading chair with lamplight on his face. She'd captured something he hadn't seen in the mirror. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a deep, settled sense of rightness. "Keep it," she said, "so you remember why this matters." On a cold morning in late January, Aldric hiked to Garrett's grave with fresh pine branches. The snow was deep, and the walk took longer than usual, but he made the journey every few weeks now. It felt important to talk to Garrett, to update him on the cabin, the people, the ways his work continued. "Your daughter came," Aldric said, arranging the branches by the simple stone marker. "I know I've told you before, but it bears repeating. She forgave you, Garrett. Maybe not completely, maybe not all at once, but she's working on it. And she's protecting what you built. She's making sure it survives in a way you couldn't." The forest was silent except for wind, through snow-laden branches. "I'm doing my best," Aldric continued, "following your example but trying to avoid your mistakes, staying connected to my children, getting professional help when I need it, building systems instead of martyring myself." He paused. "I think you'd approve. I hope you would." Walking back, he thought about legacy, what we leave behind, how it grows or withers after we're gone. Garrett had left this cabin and his journals, but his real legacy was the pattern he'd established, that healing happens in quiet spaces, that presence matters more than perfection, that broken people can still build something beautiful. That afternoon, Lucien prepared to leave. He'd stayed for 6 weeks, the longest visit Aldric had hosted. In that time, he'd stabilized, started sleeping more, begun processing his deployment trauma with Patricia's help during her visits. He'd decided to pursue formal therapy at the VA, to try medication for his PTSD, to give himself permission to BTS. "Need help." "I'm not fixed," Lucien said, packing his bag, "but I'm better. I understand now that better is enough." He added his entry to the visitor's log. Lucien, 28. "War taught me violence. This place taught me that peace is possible again. Thank you for the silence and the soup and the patience." January 24. After Lucien left, Aldric sat at the table with his own journal, the one he'd started months ago to parallel Garrett's. He read through his entries, tracking his own transformation from a man hiding from grief to someone actively engaging with purpose. One entry, from early November, stood out. "I came here to disappear. Instead, I found a way to matter. The irony isn't lost on me. I had to lose everything to find what actually mattered." He wrote a new entry now. 6 months in this place. 23 people helped, though helped feels like too strong a word. 23 people given space and time and acceptance. Some came back better, some I'll never know about. All of them taught me something about resilience, about the capacity humans have to survive impossible things. That evening, as lamplight filled the cabin and the wood stove radiated warmth against the winter cold, Aldric heard footsteps on the stairs. He opened the door to find a woman in her 40s, exhausted and uncertain, her eyes carrying the specific grief he recognized immediately. "I lost my husband 6 months ago," she said without preamble. "Someone at a grief support group mentioned this place, said it helped them. I didn't believe it, but I've tried everything else, and nothing works. Nothing makes it hurt less." Aldric stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "Nothing will make it hurt less. Not here. Not anywhere. but you can learn to carry it differently. Come in. You're safe here." She climbed inside, and as Aldric closed the door behind her and began preparing tea, he felt the familiar sense of rightness that came with this work. Each person who found this place reminded him why he stayed, why he'd signed those agreements, why he'd chosen purpose over escape. Her name was Caroline, and she cried for the first hour, the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from months of holding everything together. Aldric didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He simply sat with her in the grief the way others had sat with his, and let her know through his presence that she wasn't alone in the unbearable weight of loss. Later, after she'd exhausted herself and fallen asleep in the loft, Aldric stood at the window looking out at the moonlit forest. 6 months ago, he'd been a hollow man, walking into these trees with no plan beyond disappearing. Now he was someone who mattered, not because he'd fixed anyone or solved any problems, but because he'd created space where healing could begin. Garrett had built the cabin. Simone had protected it. And Aldric was learning to sustain it, not through martyrdom or isolation, but through connection and structure, and the hard work of staying engaged with both the mission and his own life. Spring came slowly to the forest, measured in small revelations, snow melting to reveal last year's undergrowth, buds forming on branches, the return of birdsong at dawn. By April, the clearing around the ancient tree had transformed into something alive and hopeful. The garden beds Aldric had repaired, now showing the first green shoots of vegetables he'd planted. Caroline stayed for 2 weeks, and in that time, Aldric watched her move through stages of grief he recognized from his own journey. The first days were just survival, sleeping, eating, existing without the constant pressure of maintaining appearances. Then came the talking, long conversations about her husband, their life together, the unfairness of cancer taking someone at 47. "Everyone says it gets easier," she told him one morning, as they worked in the garden together. "But that feels like a lie. It doesn't get easier," Aldric said, pulling weeds from around new carrot shoots. "The weight doesn't lighten, you just get stronger at carrying it." She considered this, her hands stilling in the soil. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me." Before leaving, Caroline added her entry to the visitor's log. "Caroline, 43. You didn't tell me the pain would end. You told me the truth that I could survive it anyway. Thank you." April 8. A week after Caroline left, Simone returned for her quarterly check-in, bringing supplies and news. The cabin's legal status was secure. The partnership with Dr. Keane was working well, and most surprisingly, she'd been approached by a foundation interested in supporting the work. "They fund sustainable mental health initiatives," Simone explained, sitting at the table with coffee. "Small operations that serve underserved populations. I mentioned the cabin. What you're doing here, they want to provide a modest stipend enough to cover supplies, maybe some improvements to the infrastructure." Aldric felt uncomfortable with the idea. This isn't about money. No, but money helps. Garrett ran out of savings after 5 years and had to do odd jobs in town to keep going. That pulled him away from the work. "You shouldn't have to make that choice." Simone pulled out papers. "It's not much. Enough to be sustainable, not enough to be profitable. The foundation just wants quarterly reports on how many people you help and what services you provide." Garrett would hate the bureaucracy. Garrett died with $11 in his account and no plan for what happened to this place after he was gone. Simone's voice was gentle but firm. "You can honor his spirit while improving his methods." Aldric signed the papers, still feeling uncertain but trusting Simone's judgment. She'd proven herself thoughtful and protective of what her father had built, even as she made it stronger. After Simone left, Aldric spent the afternoon with Garrett's journals, reading entries he'd read a dozen times before. One passage from August 1990 struck him differently now. "I thought building this place would heal me, but healing isn't a destination, it's a practice. Every day I choose this work, I'm choosing health over sickness, connection over isolation, even if I'm alone most of the time. The people who come here remind me that broken isn't the same as worthless. They're teaching me as much as I teach them. That evening, Aldric started a new journal, his third since arriving. On the first page he wrote, "Garrett's legacy continued." Then he began documenting not just his own thoughts, but the patterns he'd noticed, the methods that worked, the philosophy developing from practice. It was part instruction manual, part meditation, part letter to whoever might continue this work after him. Because Aldric understood now that this was bigger than him, bigger than Garrett. The cabin would outlast them both if it was tended properly, if each caretaker learned from the 2000 people's previous one's mistakes and successes. In May, Lydia visited with her family for the third time. The children had grown comfortable with the cabin, treating it like a beloved clubhouse. Sophie, now 8, had started her own journal documenting each visit. Oliver, 5, collected interesting rocks from the stream to add to a growing pile near the cabin entrance. "The kids talk about this place constantly," Lydia told Aldric, as they watched Sophie and Oliver play in the clearing. "It's become part of their story, Grandpa's magic tree, where people go to feel better." "I worry about that sometimes," Aldric admitted, making it seem too simple. "Healing isn't magic." "No, but sanctuary is. You've created a sanctuary." "That's not nothing." Marcus approached with a technical question about the solar panels, which had been acting up. Together, they spent the afternoon troubleshooting, eventually discovering a loose connection. The domestic normalcy of it, family, problem-solving, children, playing nearby felt impossibly precious after months of emotional intensity with visitors. Before they left, Lydia pulled Aldric aside. "Brennan's been asking about visiting. He won't admit it, but I think he's starting to understand. Would it be okay if he came in June?" "More than okay." That night, alone again, Aldric sat in the reading chair, Garrett's chair, though he thought of it as his now, and felt the full measure of his life's current shape. He was 54. His wife was gone. His job was maintaining a cabin in the wilderness and helping strangers process their pain. By conventional measures, he'd failed at middle age. By his own measures, he'd finally found something real. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Wren arrived with a tall, gangly boy about her age, both carrying art supplies. "This is Matteo." Wren introduced him, shy but happy. "He's in my art program. I told him about this place. He's applying to schools too, and he needs portfolio pieces. I thought maybe you could draw here." Aldric finished. "Of course." They spent 3 days in the clearing, sketching the tree, the cabin, the forest around them. Aldric watched them work, marveling at their talent and focus. On the second day, Wren showed him their project, a joint portfolio piece about healing spaces, combining her urban sanctuary drawings with Matteo's forest work. "We're calling it Where Broken Things Grow," Wren explained, about how damaged people and damaged places can still be beautiful. On their last evening, Matteo asked about Garrett's journals. Aldric gave him the one about building the cabin, the detailed accounts of construction and problem-solving. Matteo read it carefully, taking notes. "My dad's a carpenter," Matteo said. "He could help with repairs if you ever need it. He's good people." The offer touched Aldric deeply, this web of connections spreading out from the cabin. People wanting to contribute, to be part of something meaningful. After Wren and Matteo left, Aldric updated his new journal. "The cabin is growing beyond what Garrett imagined, beyond what I imagined. It's becoming a community project, supported and protected by people who understand its value. Simone was right. Sustainability requires structure and connection. Garrett's solo heroism was beautiful, but unsustainable. This new version, with systems and support, might actually last." June brought Brennan, finally arriving with obvious discomfort but genuine curiosity. He stayed 2 days, asked 100 questions, examined every aspect of the operation with his engineer's mind. On the second evening, he finally spoke what he'd been holding back. "I still think this is crazy, Dad, but I also think it's the sanest thing you've done since Mum died. That's high praise from you. I mean it. You're not hiding here. You're engaged. You're helping people. You're staying connected to us. It's not what I would choose, but it's working for you. That's what matters." That night, Brennan asked to read Helen's letters, the ones she'd written Aldric during their engagement, which he'd brought to the cabin in his original pack. They sat together reading them by lamplight, crying together for the first time since the funeral. "She'd be proud of you," Brennan said finally. Probably worried too, but definitely proud. Autumn returned to the forest in late September, painting the clearing in shades of amber and gold. Aldric had been in the cabin for 1 full year now, and the anniversary felt significant in ways he hadn't expected. He'd helped 41 people in those 12 months. 41 entries in the visitor's log, 41 stories of pain and searching, and the tentative steps toward healing. Some had stayed in touch, letters forwarded through Simone's office, occasional visits from those who felt themselves slipping and needed the cabin's particular sanctuary again. Others had disappeared back into their lives, and Aldric hoped that meant they'd found what they needed. The cabin itself had evolved. The foundation funding allowed for proper weatherproofing, updated medical supplies, and a small library of resources on trauma, grief, and addiction that Dr. Keene had helped assemble. But the essential character remained unchanged, simple, quiet, welcoming. Still Garrett's vision, just reinforced and sustained. On the morning of his anniversary, Aldric hiked to Garrett's grave, with wild flowers he'd gathered from the meadow beyond the clearing. The marker looked weathered now, softened by a year of seasons, moss growing on its northern edge. 1 year, Aldric said, arranging the flowers. 41 people. Some success stories, some I'll never know about. A few I probably failed. But I'm still here. Still trying. He paused, listening to the wind through the trees. "Your daughter visits regularly now. She's forgiven you, I think. Or she's working on it, which is close enough. She made this sustainable, gave it structure. You never could. I think you'd be grateful for that, even if you'd argue about the details." He sat on the ground, his back against a nearby tree. "I understand now why you couldn't leave. Not just because people needed this place, but because you needed it too. The work was part of your healing, not separate from it. Every person you helped was you helping yourself, proving you could still do good after all the damage." A branch cracked somewhere in the forest, probably a deer moving through the underbrush. Aldric closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him, this wilderness that had become home. "I miss Helen," he continued, his voice softer, "every single day. But the missing doesn't destroy me anymore. It's just part of who I am now, a man who loved deeply and lost that love and kept going anyway. The cabin taught me that. All these people teaching me that survival is possible, that broken doesn't mean finished." He stayed at the grave for another hour, then walked back to find a young man waiting on the steps, maybe 30, with the careful posture of someone recently discharged from the military. Aldric recognized the signs immediately. The hypervigilance, the controlled movements, the eyes that scanned for threats, even in this peaceful clearing. "Are you Aldric?" the man asked. "I am. My name's Adrian. I heard about this place from another vet. He said it saved his life. I thought maybe—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought maybe it could help me too." Aldric climbed the steps and opened the door. "Come in, Adrian. You're safe here." As Adrian entered the cabin, his shoulders lowering slightly in response to the space's quiet welcome, Aldric felt the familiar sense of rightness that came with this work. He made tea while Adrian settled into the reading chair, gave him space to breathe and adjust before asking any questions. That evening, after Adrian had eaten and retreated to the loft to sleep, Aldric sat at the table with both journals, Garrett's original and his own continuation. He placed them side by side, two men's attempts to document healing, separated by decades but connected by purpose. He opened his journal to a fresh page and began writing, knowing this entry was for whoever came after him, whenever that might be. To the next caretaker, this place will change you. Not because it's magic, but because choosing to help others when you're broken yourself requires you to become someone stronger. You'll doubt yourself constantly. You'll wonder if you're qualified, if you're doing more harm than good, if you should just give up and return to normal life. Don't give up. But also, don't do this alone. Garrett tried that and it killed him. Build systems, accept help, stay connected to the people who love you. The work matters, but it can't be everything. You'll meet people at their worst, grieving, addicted, traumatized, lost. Don't try to fix them. Just give them space to exist without judgment. Provide shelter, food, presence, patience. The healing is theirs to do. You're just holding the space where it becomes possible. Document everything. Not just who comes and when, but what works, what doesn't, what you're learning. This knowledge is the real inheritance, more valuable than the cabin itself. Remember that you're part of a legacy now. Garrett built this. Simone protected it. I sustained it. You'll add your own piece to the story. Honor what came before while making it your own. And when it's time to leave, because it will be, eventually make sure you leave it better than you found it. Find the next person, train them, give them what you wish you'd had starting out. This is sacred work, but you're not a martyr. Take care of yourself. Rest. Leave when you need to leave. Come back if you can. But don't die alone in this chair thinking the work is more important than your life. The work is life, connection, compassion, the daily choice to matter. Don't sacrifice the substance for the symbol. He signed it, dated it, then placed both journals together on the shelf where Garrett had kept his. Someday, perhaps decades from now, another person would find them and learn what he'd learned, that broken people can still build beautiful things, that purpose outlasts pain, that sanctuary is something you create and maintain, not something you stumble into by accident. 3 days later, Lydia arrived with her whole family for an autumn visit. The children had grown again, Sophie now, drawing in her own journal, Oliver asking questions about everything. They spent the afternoon together, cooking over the wood stove, telling stories, existing in the simple pleasure of family connection. As the sun set and painted the clearing in gold light, Sophie asked, "Grandpa, will you always live here?" Aldric considered the question carefully. "I don't know about always. But for now, yes, this is where I'm supposed to be. Because of the magic tree, because of the people who need it, and because it helps me too." That night, after his family had hiked back down to where they'd parked, after Adrian had gone to sleep, Aldric stood at the window looking out at the ancient tree's massive trunk, the stars visible through the canopy above. He thought about the year that had passed, the person he'd been when he arrived, hollow, grieving, purposeless, and the person he'd become. He'd come here to disappear. Instead, he'd found the only thing that mattered, a way to transform his own pain into something useful, to honor Helen's memory not by drowning in grief, but by helping others survive their own drowning. The cabin would stand long after he was gone, he hoped. Others would come, seeking what Garrett had sought, what Aldric had sought, what all lost people seek, a place to be broken without shame, a space to remember who they are beneath the pain. Aldric closed his journal and placed it beside Garrett's, 2 links in a chain that stretched backward into the past and forward into an unknown future. Outside, the forest conducted its ancient business, wind through branches, water over stone, the slow turning of seasons. Inside the tree, within the impossible cabin built into its heart, a man who'd lost everything found he still had something to give. And that, he understood now, was grace unearned, unexpected, and more than enough. He was home.